Oh, yes. Haven. This was legit one of my, I'm not sure if favorite's the right word for it, but the most memorable episodes of TNG. See, part of the reason for that, though, is that I saw this thing in the Star Trek Birth of the Federation game and was confused because I played the game before seeing this episode, so I didn't know what it was. Then I saw the episode, and I felt bad about killing them anytime I saw them in the game. Because the game forces you to kill them. They're the only enemy in the game that does not attempt to fight back. But having one in orbit of one of your planets will kill the population of the planet. Slowly, mind you. So you have several turns to kill it before your planet's population gets wiped out, but it will kill off the planet's population. Also, that being said, I love this ship design. This is one of the coolest designs they did for TNG. The whole like energy bubble thing as what's presumably the warp drive. Oh, yes, that is amazing. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this is also the fact that in terms of being a threat to the Enterprise D, it's not, which is something that's a major plot point in this episode and makes me personally question everything when rewatching the episode. Yeah. Oh, yes. There is a lot to talk about here. All right. So let's begin. So this picture of Deanna Troy kissing Wyatt. That happens in Wyatt's imagination, if I remember right. Or maybe not. Actually, I think it might have been a scene where Wyatt's like, "Ah, yes, soon we will be married," and smooches her, and she's like, "Yeah, not interested," because of the fact that the first major story beat of this, and the one that I personally feel would be most awkward for a TTRPG, is having someone be like, "Oh yes, I'm going to marry you now. Nice, nice to meet you finally for the first time ever," and having that actually get pushed as a serious plot beat. Nah. When it's a player character, uh, if iffy at best. But having an NPC end up with that in that situation, sure, why not? Because of the whole like emotional weight thing, it's it just comes across emotionally very different. Now, the way that this got resolved in the episode is batshit. Oh yes, I'm going to get back to that later, but in due time. So the whole like Troy getting married thing f- from in the episode is very strange because of the fact that it's a surprise to everyone except Troy. And even then, uh, Troy is like, "Oh yeah, I knew this was going to happen, but I wasn't sure exactly when." And it's like, "Wait, what? Huh?" I don't understand that. And that's part of the marriage story arc with this that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's they'd had previous discussions regarding Troy maybe possibly getting married in the previous few episodes. Again, this is mid season one. So the whole idea of Troy and Riker as a couple had actually been established because that's one of the things they started out with in the first episode. That was how they started out establishing the backstories of Troy and Riker is that they were emotionally attached to each other. And people genuinely, from an in universe perspective, questioned why they hadn't gotten married already. And one way of looking at it is that the reason Troy hadn't married Riker is because she knew that she was going to be um, given off as some sort of uh, whatever um, arranged marriage. Because, as is established here, Troy actually doesn't have any idea who Wyatt is. Well, I suppose I should say Deanna Troy, because her mother. That's different. And that's one of the things about this that makes the episode very, very strange is that you have all of these expensive looking gems and stuff in the gift box that gets beamed up. And it's like, that's an awful lot of party favors. Oh, yeah, also, the gift box was played by Armin Shimmerman, who also did Quark. Ah, boy. Okay, so it has a few other things that are amusing, like the mythic chameleon rose, which the interesting thing was okay, one, it's native to Beta set, of course, but also it's a plant that's empathic and changes colors to match the mood of the person holding it. It's not actually explained in the episode what the various colors mean, but you could have like blue be like apprehension and nervousness, red be annoyance or anger, and purple, white, I don't know. If you're going to use that in a plot, you'd have to make things up because of the fact that we know so little about it that attempting to uh, explain how it works from the perspective of the TV show doesn't really go very far. Could be used. Now, here is something interesting. Who are the Havenites? Because the people of Haven are a large part of the plot. But now, here's an interesting thing. It's like the Tarellians are apparently coming here because of the planet's incredible reputation of being a place people can come to recover from injuries and bad feelings that have never been healable before. Well, oh, here's another plot point that coming up that's amusing. A word that got used in Star Trek, even though it's not something that's normally associated with Star Trek. The way the phrase is used in this particular case suggests that the Stargate that they're talking to here is a method of controlling entryway into the star system. They don't actually explain anything. It's not seen. It's simply referred to in dialogue. But it's a plot point because of the fact that the Tarellians just fly straight through it. And this is another interesting plot point, is that the Tarellians didn't actually talk to people while they're doing this. They just did it, which is a bit odd. So the Haven natives are, whether they're actually human or not, is they seem to be one of those races that are functionally identical to humans. Because, like in the episode where I talked about the Edo, it's like there's nothing about the Edo that makes them look different from humans. Nothing. These people, um, well, we don't actually see enough of them to have a particularly good idea as to what's normal for their race. But this person looks human. Interesting costuming, makeup, but this may have actually been the only one we saw. I'm not sure about that because of the fact that, for the most part, the episode, while the people of Haven are a major plot point, um, it's interesting because the fact that in the end part of this, the idea of the Tarellians living on what is functionally a leper colony somewhere on Haven is actually not an idea that gets firmly rejected. We don't actually find out what Valida Innes thinks about that, though, which is strange because of the fact that they're presumably still in orbit of Haven or somewhere close enough where Picard could easily just use subspace radio to call them. But the episode ends before we get to that point. Hmm. Now, that is actually something that I would personally do in a TTRPG. Unless you're going to like have it like, oh, this is episode one. Now for episode two, we'll find out the next step of things. Hey, you know what? In a campaign for TTRPG, having multi-episode plots is actually quite good. So don't necessarily need to wrap up everything in the first episode. Now, this is something that's interesting. Haven supposedly has no planetary defenses, because they're relying on the Federation to protect them. However, it also says it's Haven's not a Federation world. Huh? Wyatt is a non-Federation member relying on the Federation to protect them. I don't fully understand that one. Also, the whole Stargate thing that is suggested as being something intended as a way to protect Haven, although we don't actually know what it is, so we don't know exactly how the Tarellians bypassed it. Anyways, though, speaking of the Tarellians are also a race that look functionally identical to humans. We only actually meet two of them. Oh, yes, we will be getting back to her later. Now, there's several aspects of the whole thing with the Tarellian plague that are very, very sus. And that is what I'm going to get to now. See, the basic plot of this is that at the same time that Wyatt and his parents show up on the Enterprise in order to talk to Picard about the fact that Deanna is supposedly getting married to Wyatt, at the same time, the Tarellian starship happens to show up in the Haven system. Huh. Well, incredibly convenient plot aside, because that's actually an interesting thing with this, is that they actually spend enough time with the Troy getting married plot that it actually consumes the entirety of Act One and the teaser. Act 2 is the part where they introduce the Tarellians. Now, okay, also is that the people of Haven are only actually directly involved as part of Act 2. We don't see them after Act 2 because the people of Haven, that woman Valeda Innes, calls Picard to ask him for help. He's like, please, you must protect us. There's a horrible plague ship approaching our homeworld. We can't have the horrible plague infect our people. Which, okay, yes. Anyway, though, that's the part about the plague that's interesting. Because are the Tarellians actually extinct? See, the plot point between the Tarellian plague is that the homeworld of the Tarellians had a war being fought between the two main land masses, and that someone in the, this conflict decided to deploy biological weapons, which killed off most of the population of the planet, and a few survivors managed to escape the planet in ships because Torella was already a warp capable civilization and already had a space fleet before fighting this war. Which, okay, we can go with the idea that they're a backwater minor civilization and thus not a galactic power player at this point. And, maybe they didn't have any off world colonies at this point either. Side note, the sheer number of warp capable civilizations in Star Trek that do not do anything with warp travel is insane and absurd. And something I personally find to be very, very strange from an in universe logic perspective. Like, seriously, why build warp capable starships if you're not even going to leave your home system? Tangent aside. So, the Tarellian Plague. Oh, wait, that's the Tarellians themselves. Okay, so the entire Tarellian race had been infected by one or more plagues during the Tarellian Civil War, as it was referred to. Now, Tasha Yar's thing she looked up in the computer said that, sorry, Tasha Yar's thing that she looked up in the computer said that some Tarellians made it to other worlds only to die along with the populations they infected. And that it was believed that the last Tarellian vessel was destroyed 8 years ago by the Alkyones. Um, Now, this is another thing that's interesting. Beverly Crusher says that the Tarellians' skill with biological weaponry was only equal to 20th century Earth. Huh? No one in 20th century Earth has actually made a plague that deadly or that infectious, to be quite honest. Okay, infectious is the easy part. Being highly infectious, but also highly deadly. Also, there's another thing that's incredibly sus about this that makes me question the whole narrative. Oh yeah, I'm getting that. Don't worry. Okay, who are the Alkyones? We literally have no idea. No, seriously. It's just thrown out as the people of Alkyone. And this is another interesting thing is that the Alkyones are apparently uh, identified as being the inhabitants of a real solar system. And it's possible that they're just talking about the people living in that solar system, so it's not necessarily a race unique to that solar system. Again, though, that's literally all we know about them. Are they a Federation member? Maybe. I mean, Picard seems to know what they've done. And that's another thing that's interesting is that several of the everything in this episode is Federation adjacent. Everything. Like, oh yeah, forgot. Sus plot point number two is also, I'm just going to bring that up now. This chick, Ariana. See, one of the things that I suspect is the reason why the rose turned blue when Wyatt was holding it and was a weird way to signpost later development in the episode is that when Wyatt saw Deanna Troy, he didn't recognize her while he was expecting to recognize her. Why? Because he'd been having vivid dreams about a woman who he believed he was destined to marry. Turns out it's Ariana. How? We literally don't know. The Tarellians are not explained as having psychic powers, but Wyatt, who is a human, actually, you know what? Let's just double check that part here. Yeah, let's just double check and make sure that Wyatt is actually like fully human. Because as far as I remember, yes, Wyatt is fully human, and he's having these incredibly vivid dreams of him and this woman who he's never actually seen in person. And um yeah, um human physician. Mhm. Somehow he's seen this woman in his dreams, even though he doesn't even know who the Tarellians are. Huh? Like I said, that plot point doesn't get explained. But when Wyatt first sees Deanna Troy, it gets signposted by the fact that he's like, "Oh, you're different than I was expecting," because he was expecting to see Ariana. And that's one of those things I was saying about the whole thing being Federation adjacent is that literally everything in this episode is like Haven. Haven is militarily protected by the United Federation of Planets and Starfleet. The Federation knows about the Tarellian Civil War and knows that or believes that the Alkyones had killed off the last of the refugees. Also, it's stated that this was a few years prior, so, time for things to disseminate and stuff. But that's another interesting plot point because of the fact that the virus or plague, I'm not even sure it actually is a virus. I don't think they even bothered explaining that part. Yeah, it just says biological weapon. Doesn't even say whether it's a virus. Oh, I'm getting along on this one. The sus part here is the fact that it's been stated that it's been 8 years since the last known Tarellian ship was destroyed. And the crew of this one hasn't died of the plague yet. It is stated that they are, in fact, infected by the Tarellian plague and are doomed to die. But hang on a second. If it's actually this deadly, why aren't they dead? And that is the number one sus plot point in this episode. The whole thing with why Wyatt knows who Ariana is the number two plot point. But that's see, because like you as a game master would need to explain those things because your players will ask questions. They're too see the part about this that was very compelling to me is the whole thing is like, why exactly did the Federation approve of the approach of simply blowing up every Tarellian ship? because that is what the Enterprise was planning to do when they were contacted by the people of Haven. Now, they did do this thing. It's like, well, we don't really want to, but if we have to, we will do it. Because of the fact that Tasha Yar's thing would basically took the approach of the Tarellians would basically just fly to other planets, beam down, and just try to take over the planets. That's the kind of gist I got from it, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because one, how are there that many Tarellians that it's that big of a problem? And two, did those planets just like not do anything about it? Because like it makes out the Tarellian plague as being this horrible, uncurable infection. And no one in the episode has any idea whether that's actually true. Note how the description of the Tarellian plague is primarily given by Tasha Yar, who does little more than recount fatality statistics that she looks up in the computer, and Crusher doesn't say a whole hell of a lot about it. See, because here's the thing about this. What Crusher does talk about, but she says like a deadly infectious virus. Oh yeah, wait, she did say it was a virus. Okay, yeah. Well, anyways, a deadly infectious virus is not that difficult to grow with that modest level of knowledge. Like, okay, yeah, sure. If that's a modest level of knowledge, okay, where's the cure? Because you think that with like several hundred years greater knowledge, you would have some idea how to make a cure for this thing, right? And that's the single most sus aspect of this. Why are they just killing everyone infected with the Tarellian plague? Because they suggest at the end of the episode that the ship that shows up at Haven, the crew is dying. They have maybe a few years left, if that. It's one of those things that by real world standards is that if it takes several years to kill you, um, that's not particularly deadly. Real world viruses and infections will usually kill you within a matter of days or weeks if they are going to kill you at all. This one is said to have been doing this for over a decade. And Ariana has survived having the Tarellian plague for at least 8 years. Huh? Like I said, if you're going to use this as a GM, you need to think about that. If I was a GM, I would not use. You could actually use the Tarellians themselves. You could. I would. In the Tarellian plague, I would probably stay away from using the actual Tarellian plague itself. Simply because of how deeply associated it is with the Tarellians themselves, and using the Tarellian plague, but not the Tarellians, just feels wrong. But the other plot point about this, it's so interesting, is that idea that maybe possibly someone misinformed the Federation about the whole thing. Is it really a plague that killed off the population of Tarella? Or was it something else? And the plague just happened to be a thing that was talked about widely and not. Well, also, it's entirely possible that there's more than one Tarellian plague and that the vessel that shows up at Haven in the episode has a different one that's less deadly than the one that killed off most of the people on their homeworld. We don't know. Because let's face it, if the main body of the Tarellian race is already dead of the plague, and then you have these people just show up 8 years later, still alive. How? What? Why? Either they found a method of treating the Tarellian plague that is actually effective at preventing it from killing people, or they're not infected with a deadly contagion. Seriously. At any rate, though, the whole idea of a planet infected with a plague is actually something that Star Trek has done more than once. It's come up many, many times and been done several different ways. This episode is highly memorable for reasons that aren't connected with the logic of how the plague works. The logic of how the plague works is actually an aspect of the episode that's memorable because of just how sus it is for being completely sideways. Doesn't make sense by real world logic. Unless people are actually talking about multiple different plagues and the people talking about the plagues don't even know what the plague is. Which, based on what Tasha Yar and Beverly Crusher say about the Trellian plague, I would wager that neither one of them has the ability to look up an analysis of the plague or how to diagnose someone as having the plague. Now, I do think that they did throw in some point a thing where someone scanned the Tarellian ship. It's like, oh yeah, they're all infected with the plague. We should kill them now. And I don't know. Another thing that's interesting is that Wyatt Miller seemed to think that no one in the Federation made a serious effort at trying to figure out how to cure the Tarellian plague. Yeah, I forgot to mention that earlier. But that goes with the whole thing I was saying about Tasha Yar and Crusher's um minimal knowledge about the Tarellian plague. One, okay, it is understandable that from a in-universe perspective, Tasha Yar has actually not been a Starfleet officer long enough to have ever needed to personally investigate or learn anything about the Tarellian plague other than the fact that it existed. Because again, it has been believed to be eradicated by killing every infected host uh, for 8 years. Now, I would expect Dr. Crush to at least be able to look it up in the medical computer, though, because again, it doesn't really make sense for someone in the Federation to just be like, "Oh, we're going to erase this from the computer because we don't want to know anyone about it." No, 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 no. The other thing here is the whole thing about hunted down and destroyed by who? Who the was hunting down and destroying the Tarellians? That's the that's actually a plot point about this that I was getting at earlier, but didn't fully elaborate on. Is that they go with the logic that the Tarellians are being killed to prevent them from infecting other worlds. But referring to it as hunted down is strange because of the fact that we don't know anything about where they went. See, because at no point does it actually name a planet that was infected by the Tarellians. See, it's like part of this is one of those things is like, well, it's Federation adjacent. It feels like a lot of this is secondhand information. Like, they mention a race or political entity known as the Alkiones. How much of this information did the Federation get from the Alkiones? Is it possible that this is a disinformation campaign that the Alkiones did to justify exterminating their enemies. Because again, we don't know anything about the Tarellians um, in the context of whether they had any diplomatic or cultural contact with any race outside their home system. We know they're warp capable. One thing that Picard or Data, I think it was, mentions is that the Tarellian ship that we see in this episode is actually moving unusually slowly, as if it's not moving at the maximum speed that the Federation expected a Tarellian ship to be capable of. That's an interesting plot point. Why would the Federation know that much about the Tarellians and so little about them as people? Again, I'm overanalyzing what is probably poorly thought out writing in the episode. But as a game master, you need to think about things like this because your players are probably going to think about them. Boy. And with that sobering line of questioning of the events of the episode, again, I mentioned that this was one of the episodes I found most memorable in Star Trek The Next Generation, simply because of just how vivid and visceral the plot is. You have the last remnants of a nearly extinct race show up looking for help, and the conventional wisdom of how to deal with this particular race is to shoot them on sight. That's a plot point that found to be very, very memorable for reasons that are not good reasons. And yet here we are. Alrighty then. This has gone on like twice as long as most of the episodes I've talked about, but I'm going to end it now. See you guys later.